The night had a way of pressing against the glass, the kind of winter cold that made even the city lights look lonely. Elias Ward stood inside the corner booth of a quiet downtown restaurant, the warm glow of amber lamps softening the hard edges of his tailored life. He had spent the day navigating boardrooms and polite betrayals, but nothing in those gleaming offices compared to the silence settling around him now. His coat hung neatly over the seat, untouched dinner cooling in front of him. Across the window, snow drifted down like a slow confession, and he felt each flake as if it landed inside him. 30 years old, rich by every measurable standard, and yet he carried a heaviness no balance sheet could soften. He was about to leave when motion outside pulled his attention. A woman stood near the entrance, her figure half hidden under the awning, steam rising from her breath in fragile clouds. She wasn't begging, wasn't pacing, wasn't doing anything to draw notice. She simply stood there, hands buried deep in the pockets of a fraying coat, her posture quietly bracing against the cold. Something about the way she held herself, shoulders squared yet tired, eyes scanning the world with careful detachment, made his chest tighten. She looked young, maybe 23, and too thin for the biting weather. Her dark hair fell in uneven lengths around her face, as if cut by circumstance rather than choice. Elias found himself watching longer than he intended. The restaurant's warmth felt suddenly guilty, like he was hoarding a comfort she'd forgotten how to ask for. He rose before he fully understood why, grabbing his coat and stepping outside into the sharp air. Snowflakes landed on his hair, melting instantly. When she noticed him, she straightened slightly, not in fear but in a quiet readiness, as though she'd learned to meet the world by shrinking as little as possible. "You okay out here?" he asked, voice gentle, not wanting to startle her. She hesitated, then nodded once. "I'm fine," she murmured, though her lips trembled with cold. Her voice carried a resilience wrapped in exhaustion, each word trying to stand tall despite the weight behind it. He could have walked away. It would have been easier, simpler, the kind of clean exit he was used to. But something about her, this unnamed woman who refused to collapse, made turning away feel like abandoning something fragile. "Have you eaten?" he asked softly. She looked past him, avoiding the directness of concern. "Not tonight." Her tone was factual, not pleading. "Come inside," he said. "At least get warm." For a brief second she met his eyes, and he noticed the flicker of calculation there. Not distrust, but the survival instinct of someone who had learned to read intentions with precision. She wasn't scared. She was deciding whether kindness had strings she couldn't afford. Finally, she nodded. "Just for a little while." Inside, the heat wrapped around them like a gentle hand. She exhaled as if her lungs were remembering what warmth felt like. Elias gestured to the booth, and she lowered herself carefully onto the seat, her hands resting in her lap, fingers clasped tightly. Up close, he saw faint purple shadows under her eyes, the kind that come from nights spent listening to the world instead of sleeping in it. "I'm Elias," he offered. "Mira," she replied quietly. He ordered her dinner, a simple meal, something warm and filling. When the plate arrived, she hesitated again, almost reverently, as if the sight of real food created a knot in her throat. Then she ate slowly, with deliberate grace, not wanting to appear desperate even though hunger softened her caution. Elias pretended to check his phone, giving her the dignity of not being watched. The restaurant hummed with soft music, string lights tracing golden reflections across the windows. As she ate, color slowly returned to her face. She wasn't beautiful in the polished way people in his world were. She was beautiful in the way cracked earth becomes after rain. Quiet, unexpected, honest. "What brought you out here tonight?" he asked gently. Mira set her fork down, fingers brushing the plate's edge. "Life," she said after a moment. "Life brings you places you never planned to stand." She didn't elaborate, but the small tremor in her voice carried more story than any explanation. He didn't push. Instead, he let the silence between them settle like falling snow, soft and unhurried. She glanced at him occasionally, as if trying to understand why a man who looked like he owned the whole room would notice someone like her. When she finished, she murmured, "Thank you for this. You didn't have to." "I know," Elias said. "But I wanted to." Something in her expression shifted. Just a breath of vulnerability, quickly restrained. She slid her hands into her coat pockets again, preparing to leave. I should go. I've taken enough of your time. You haven't, he replied softly. Let me help you get somewhere safe tonight. Myra's shoulders stiffened. I don't take money, she said, gentle but firm. He shook his head. I wasn't offering money. Just a ride. Or somewhere warm. Her eyes lifted, studying him more closely now. Snow clung to the window behind her, forming pale halos around her silhouette. She breathed in slowly. Why are you being kind to me? Because you look cold, he said simply. And tired. And because kindness shouldn't be rare. Her lips parted slightly, as if the simplicity of his answer disarmed her more than any grand gesture could. For a heartbeat, the air between them felt fragile, trembling with something unnamed. Then she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. I lied earlier, she said. I'm not fine. And I wasn't just standing outside. Elias leaned forward, sensing the shift. I was waiting, she whispered. Not for you. For courage. So I could walk away from something I never should have survived. And just like that, the warmth of the restaurant felt too thin, and the night outside suddenly loomed with secrets he hadn't expected to touch. The warmth in the restaurant felt almost intrusive after the night air they had escaped, as if they'd stepped into a world that wasn't entirely meant for either of them. Elias held the door a second longer than necessary, watching Mara hesitate at the threshold. Her eyes shifted over the glow of chandeliers, the polished wood floors, the soft hum of quiet conversations. Things she clearly hadn't been near for a long time. She tugged her sleeves low, as though trying to shrink herself down, but he noticed the trembling wasn't from cold anymore. He didn't urge her. He simply waited, a still presence beside the storm she was fighting internally, until she slowly stepped in. The maitre d' raised an eyebrow, the kind of reflex born from years of dealing with elite clientele, but Elias met him with an unblinking stare that required no explanation. The man swallowed whatever he was about to say, and led them to a small booth near a tall window. Outside, rain smudged the reflection of city lights into amber streaks. Elias saw the way Mara glanced at the window, like she wasn't sure if she belonged inside or outside looking in. She didn't reach for the menu at first. Her hand stayed clasped around the fingers of her opposite sleeve, twisting the fabric with quiet desperation. Elias gently slid the menu closer to her side, but didn't push it into her hands. The gesture alone spoke. You're allowed to choose for yourself. She finally lifted it, head lowered, scanning the words like they might test her literacy or her worth. After a long pause, she whispered, I'll take whatever's cheapest. Her voice held no shame, only habit. He shook his head softly. Order what you actually want. She blinked. Once. Twice. As though the permission itself was unfamiliar territory. She pointed to a simple soup, then pulled her hand away as though she'd touched something too fragile to break. Elias didn't correct her again. Trust wasn't built by tearing down the walls she used to protect herself. It was built by being present, quietly, consistently, without invasion. When the waiter left, a pocket of silence settled between them. Gentle, not suffocating. Rain tapped against the window in soft, steady rhythms. Elias watched her breathe more evenly with each moment, her shoulders lowering from the tight arch they'd held outdoors. She studied the faint candle placed between them, letting her fingers hover over its warmth without touching it. Haven't felt something warm that wasn't a blanket in a while, she murmured, half to herself. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he offered something of equal weight in return. I used to sit in places like this with my daughter, he said quietly. She'd try to blow out every candle within reach. He smiled faintly at the memory. I'd pretend to be annoyed, but honestly, I loved it. Mara didn't look up, but he saw the way the edges of her expression softened. The candlelight mirrored in her eyes. You talk like someone who lost something, she said, barely audible. Not lost, he replied after a moment. Just learning how to carry it differently. A tiny nod told him she understood that kind of weight too well. Their food arrived with a gentle clatter that seemed louder in the soft mood. Mara flinched slightly, then steadied herself, picking up the spoon with careful fingers. When she tasted the soup, something shifted in her expression. Like warmth had finally slipped past her guard and reached a part of her that had been numb far too long. She breathed out shakily. Not because the soup was hot. Because something inside her was thawing. Elias didn't stare. He didn't need to. The whole moment was felt, not watched. Halfway through the meal, she paused to wipe her mouth with a napkin, uncertain if she was allowed. He offered no correction, no pity. Only presence. That was enough. The candle flickered between them, pulling long shadows across the table, making everything feel like a paused frame in a quiet film. She finally looked at him fully. "Why'd you stop?" "On the street, I mean. Most people don't even see me." He met her gaze without the hesitation of a man who needed to invent a noble reason. "Because you looked like you'd forgotten what it feels like to be treated like a person. And I know what it's like to feel invisible in a room full of people who think they see you." Her breath caught. That truth didn't come from pity. It came from recognition. For the first time since he'd met her, she allowed herself to lean back slightly, just enough to create space for breathing. "People usually want something when they help," she said. "You didn't even ask my name." "I figured you'd tell me when you wanted to," he replied. "I'm Mara," she said after a moment, like offering the name was a piece of herself she had kept locked away. "Mara Lorne." "Elias Ward." Her eyes widened a little. "The Elias Ward? The tech guy everyone talks about." She said it like she was afraid she'd offended him just by recognizing him. He sighed softly. "The name matters more to other people than it does to me." Mara lowered her gaze, tracing the rim of her cup. "So why me?" She whispered again, but this time not with suspicion, more with disbelief threaded through quiet hope. Before he could answer, her trembling hand accidentally knocked over her water glass. It shattered on the floor, echoing too loudly in the quiet restaurant. Several patrons turned. Mara froze instantly, her entire body stiffening, breath halting, eyes wide with dread, as though expecting anger or expulsion or shame. But Elias stood before she could react. "It's fine," he told the waiter, his tone steady. He crouched down, picking up the largest pieces carefully. "Accidents happen." Then he looked up at her. Not annoyed, not embarrassed, just calm, grounding, present. Something broke open inside her at that moment. Not in pain. In relief. The waiter hurried over with towels, but Mara was already shaking her head, eyes filling with panic rather than tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." "Mara," Elias said gently, rising to his feet. "You don't have to apologize for existing in a room." Her breath faltered. No one had ever said something like that to her. Certainly not with sincerity woven so quietly into the words. The room faded around her. Conversation dimmed. Only one question rose in her voice, trembling with something raw and fearful. "Then why does it feel like I always do?" Elias opened his mouth to answer, only for the entrance doors to swing open behind them, letting a gust of cold air cut through the warmth. Mara's face drained of color. She pulled her hood low, shrinking into the booth as though someone outside had just stepped into the restaurant looking for her. And Elias realized, something or someone from her past had just found their way into the present. And Mara wasn't ready for him to know why. The evening settled over the city like a slow exhale, its lights flickering against the damp sidewalks as if trying to warm a world that refused to let go of its chill. Adrian Vale walked with his shoulders slightly hunched, not from the cold, but from the familiar weight of a loneliness he had learned to carry quietly. The rain had thinned to a mist, soft enough to blur the street lamps into halos, harsh enough to remind him he had no one waiting at home. When he reached the small cafe he had taken Mara to once, he paused, letting the memory settle like dust he was afraid to disturb. But the door swung open and warm air poured out, carrying with it the scent of bread, cinnamon, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Inside, Lila sat at a corner table, the soft glow of a wall lamp painting her features in gentle gold. Her jacket hung loosely around her shoulders, still damp from the night. In front of her sat a bowl of untouched soup, steam curling into the dim air like a fragile secret. She didn't see him at first. Her eyes were lowered, fixed on the spoon she absently turned between her fingers. Adrian hesitated, unsure if interrupting this quiet, isolated moment would expose a truth neither of them had spoken aloud. That something in her presence tugged at him in ways he wasn't ready to name. When she finally looked up, her expression shifted in a way that stilled him. Not surprise. Not fear. Something gentler. Something like recognition. "You came back," she murmured, her voice low, carrying the tremor of someone unused to being looked for. "I said I would," Adrian replied, moving toward the table. "You shouldn't be alone out here tonight." Lila gave a small, hesitant laugh, as if unsure whether kindness toward her could ever be uncomplicated. "I'm alone most nights. It's quieter that way." He sat across from her, careful not to push, careful not to crowd the fragile piece she carried like a wound. Quiet doesn't always mean safe. She looked down again, tracing circles along the bowl's rim. "Safe is something I stopped expecting a long time ago." A server passed by, refilling water, soft clinks echoing in the stillness. The city's muffled hum seeped through the window, yet the space between them felt like a small pocket of warmth carved out of the cold beyond the glass. "Eat," Adrian said softly. "You need something warm in you." She obeyed in small, delicate movements, as if she had forgotten how to take care of herself. Each spoonful seemed to smooth the tension in her shoulders. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the unfamiliar sensation of being watched over. The way her fingers trembled when she set the spoon down made something in Adrian tighten painfully. "Why were you out there tonight?" he asked gently. Lila hesitated. The silence stretched, long enough that he wondered if he had pushed too far. But then she exhaled, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I was looking for a place to sleep. The shelter was full." Adrian felt the truth of it hit him in the chest. Not pity. No, something deeper. Anger at the world. At the cold. At every door that had shut in her face. "You're freezing," he said. "You shouldn't have to wander like that." "It's just how things are," she replied, as if explaining the weather. "You get used to not belonging anywhere." He leaned forward slightly. "You belong here right now." Her gaze flickered to his, startled by the softness in his tone. She held his eyes for a long, fragile moment before turning toward the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass like slow tears. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked finally. "Because you deserve it," he said. "Because everyone does." She swallowed, the movement small, but revealing. "People say that, but they don't stay long enough to mean it." Adrian's fingers tightened around his glass. "I'm still here, Lila." Her breath caught, barely noticeable, yet something inside her seemed to shift, like the first crack of winter ice under the promise of spring. She pressed her palms together, warming them with her breath, and he found himself watching her with an ache he hadn't expected. When another gust of wind rattled the window, she flinched. He noticed. She noticed him noticing. The air took on a fragile tension, a quiet understanding neither dared speak aloud. "I keep thinking," she murmured, "that if I let moments like this feel real, they won't last." Adrian shook his head gently. "Maybe things don't have to last forever to matter." She blinked slowly, absorbing that. A small softness appeared at the edge of her expression, like dawn trying to break through a night sky. The tension between them softened into something quieter, steadier. And yet, just when it seemed she might relax into the warmth of the moment, her eyes shifted toward the cafe door. Her posture stiffened, her breath quickened, just enough for Adrian to notice. Someone had walked in. A man with sharp eyes, scanning the room. Lila's spoon slipped from her fingers. Adrian leaned closer, voice low and steady. "Lila, who is he?" Her answer came in a trembling whisper. "The reason I ran." She didn't look at Adrian again. Her gaze was locked on the man moving slowly past the counter, pretending to read the chalkboard menu, while his eyes kept drifting back to her. Fear pooled beneath her calm expression, a fear practiced enough to be almost invisible. Adrian felt the room tighten around them, as if the warmth they had begun to build was suddenly shrinking. He reached out, not to touch her, but to anchor her with his presence alone. "You're safe with me," he said quietly. But Lila's breath shook as she whispered, "Not if he finds out I spoke to you." He stepped closer. The morning light arrived gently, filtering through the thin curtains of Adrian's apartment like a soft apology for the night before. It painted the wooden floor in pale gold and rested over Lila, where she sat curled on the far end of the couch, wrapped in a blanket he had draped around her hours earlier. Her eyes were half open, tracing the quietness of the room as if unsure whether she was allowed to relax in a place untouched by fear. Adrian watched her from the kitchen doorway, the soft hum of the kettle behind him filling the silence with a domestic warmth he hadn't felt in years. Something about the way she breathed, slow, steady, guarded, made the room feel real in a way his life rarely did. When she glanced toward him, her expression held a mixture of gratitude and unease. "I didn't mean to fall asleep," she whispered, voice still heavy with exhaustion. "You needed rest," Adrian replied softly. "You don't have to apologize for that." He walked toward her, offering a mug of steaming tea. The rising tendrils curled in the air, carrying lavender and honey, and Lila held the mug with both hands the way someone holds something fragile enough to disappear. Her fingers brushed the ceramic, absorbing the warmth the way frost absorbs morning light. "You didn't sleep much," she murmured, studying his tired eyes. "I wanted to make sure you felt safe," he said simply. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet stretched between them, but it wasn't the uneasy kind that demanded explanation. It felt more like a soft hollow, where two people could breathe without being watched. Lila looked slowly around the room, taking in the small things. A bookshelf filled with worn spines, a faded photograph of Adrian's mother on the mantel, a potted plant leaning toward the window. "Your place feels gentle," she said. He smiled, surprised by how much the word meant coming from her. "I try." But her gaze drifted downward, and the warmth she had begun to hold flickered like a candle facing a draft. "I'm not used to spaces that feel safe," she said. "And I'm scared of ruining this one." Adrian sat down across from her, leaning forward slightly, careful not to edge too close. "You're not ruining anything." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "But I can't stay. I don't want to pull you into my mess." His voice softened, but carried steady conviction. "You didn't pull me into anything. I made a choice last night. And I'd make it again." Lila swallowed, her throat visibly tightening. "You don't know everything about me." "Then tell me what you want me to know," he said. "Only what you're ready to share." She closed her eyes as if weighing whether she deserved to be believed, whether her truth would change the tenderness he had shown her. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled, not from weakness but from the bravery of letting someone in. "I left home because of him, the man from the cafe. He wasn't a stranger. He was someone who promised to help me once. And then he used everything I didn't have against me." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he forced his hands to remain still. "You don't owe him fear anymore." Lila shook her head, her voice tight. "People like him don't let go easily. And people like me, we don't get many chances to escape twice." Adrian let a breath settle into the quiet before answering. "Then maybe this time, you don't have to escape alone." The way her eyes lifted toward him, slow, unsure, hopeful in spite of herself, felt like watching the first sunrise after a long winter storm. She didn't say yes. She didn't have to. Her silence held the kind of fragile trust that grows only when someone has been wounded deeply enough to know the cost of opening their guard. Minutes passed. The kettle clicked softly behind them. A small bird landed on the balcony railing outside, singing a single note like the world was trying to remind her that good things still happened uninvited. Lila set the empty mug aside and stood, her movements quiet but deliberate. She walked toward the window, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders as she looked down at the street below. Cars rolled by. People hurried to work. Life moved on, unaware that something tender and trembling had been born in the stillness of this room. "I used to imagine mornings like this," she whispered. "Not here. Not with you. Just mornings where I wasn't running." Adrian approached slowly, stopping at a respectful distance. "Do you feel like you're running right now?" She hesitated. "No. And that scares me more." He exhaled softly. Maybe peace feels frightening when you're not used to it. She turned toward him then, eyes glossy with something unspoken. Something between fear and longing for a life she wasn't sure she had the right to want. I don't know what comes next. You don't need to, Adrian said. One morning at a time is enough. Lila looked at him, as if trying to understand how a person could speak so gently in a world that had taught her gentleness was a lie. She stepped closer, not by intention, but by the natural pull of feeling safe near someone who treated her with quiet dignity. He didn't move, letting her come to him on her own terms. When she stopped, barely 2 feet away, her breath trembled in the warm air between them. I'm not good at letting people help me, she admitted. You don't need to be good at it, he replied. You just need to not walk out the door before you're ready. A soft, fragile laugh slipped from her lips. It faded quickly, replaced by something deeper. She looked around the apartment again, but this time her gaze lingered. On the cushions she'd slept against. On the blanket still wrapped around her. On Adrian, standing steady and unhurried before her. Is it really okay, she whispered, if I stay a little longer? Adrian nodded once, gently. Stay as long as you need. Her breath caught in her chest. A quiet, stunned sound of someone realizing the ground beneath them wasn't collapsing for once. She wasn't smiling, not fully, but her eyes softened, and that alone felt like a miracle forming in slow motion. A warm glow settled over the room. Outside, the morning deepened, and the world moved on. But in here, something had shifted. Something subtle, something healing. Lila walked back to the couch, not to leave, but to sit with the quiet comfort of belonging just a little. As Adrian moved to make breakfast, she watched him with a look that carried the weight of everything she'd survived, and the fragile hope of everything she had yet to understand. And just as the moment settled into gentle stillness, the apartment buzzer rang. Sharp, unexpected, cutting through the warmth like a thin blade of winter air. Lila froze. Someone was downstairs, asking for Adrian by name.